Imagine running the second fastest Kentucky Derby in human history, while swallowing your own blood from 2 knocked-out teeth. Imagine possessing a colossal 18-pound heart, more than twice the size of a normal racehorse, and still being remembered by history as racing's ultimate loser. His name was Sham, and he didn't just lose to Secretariat. He was destroyed trying to pull off an impossible miracle. Before the gates ever crashed open at the 1973 Belmont Stakes, Sham's team signed an absolute zero-compromise suicide pact. They knew if they ran a conservative race, they were dead anyway, so they unleashed a suicidal, breakneck pace so violent that it physically broke Sham's body forever. But the true, terrifying secret didn't come to light until 20 years later during a routine medical autopsy, revealing a biological anomaly that proved Sham wasn't just a runner-up, but a tragic god born into the wrong decade. To understand how a horse carved out of pure steel and biological genius became a forgotten ghost in the shadow of Big Red, you have to look past the official record books. You have to step directly into the blood, the high-stakes tactical chess, and the cruelest twist of timing in modern sports history. This is not the story of a horse who failed. This is the tragic, untold saga of the ultimate monster who sacrificed his own life to force Secretariat into immortality. In the cold, unforgiving theatre of sports history, timing isn't just everything. It is a brutal, heartless sentence. Every legendary superhero narrative requires an immovable object, a terrifying antagonist capable of pushing the protagonist to the absolute brink of human or physical capacity. In 1970, in the sunlit paddocks of Claiborne Farm, a massive dark bay colt was born with the physical blueprint of an absolute god. He possessed a terrifyingly powerful shoulder, legs carved like steel beams, and a raw, weaponized stride that was engineered for pure, unadulterated speed. On paper, and in reality, he was a once-in-a-generation force of nature, built to steamroll through modern racing history and claim the sport's highest crowns. There was only one fatal, tragic twist of fate. He was born into the exact same birth crop as Secretariat. His name was Sham, and history would cruelly remember him not as the generational titan he truly was, but as a ghost floating in the wake of an impossible myth. To understand the sheer scale of Secretariat's mythic perfection, you cannot simply look at the stopwatch or the length of the margins. You have to look at the broken, bleeding body of the monster who tried to match him stride for stride. Sham was not just another horse in the gate. He was the primary tactical threat, the relentless predator, and the suffocating shadow glued to Big Red's flank. He was the only athlete on earth powerful enough to strip away the gloss, force the legend into deep water, and demand a performance that defied the very laws of equine biology. This is not the story of a runner-up. This is the story of racing's ultimate tragedy, the beast who ran like a god, only to be buried alive by a miracle. Before he ever set foot on the East Coast, to confront the golden boy of American racing, Sham had already turned the West Coast into his personal slaughterhouse. Under the blistering California sun, the massive bay colt wasn't just winning races. He was dismantling his competition with a cold, terrifying efficiency. Purchased for $200,000 during the historic Claiborne Farm dispersal by New York builder Sigmund Summer, and handed to tactical mastermind Frank Pancho Martin, Sham found his ultimate weapon in legendary jockey Laffit Pincay Jr. When Pincay climbed into the irons, he didn't just feel a racehorse beneath him. He felt an unstoppable freight train built of pure muscle and iron intent. In the spring of 1973, while media headlines across the nation were already crowning Secretariat as an unassailable god, Sham was quietly assembling an absolute reign of terror at Santa Anita Park, dismantling elite fields by 15 lengths at a time, and stopping clock after clock in jaw-dropping stakes record speed. The definitive, undeniable declaration of his authority exploded on April 31st, 1973, in the prestigious Santa Anita Derby. Stepping up to 9 furlongs against the finest 3-year-olds in the West, Sham delivered a performance so visually devastating it sent shockwaves directly across the continent. Dropping his head and uncoiling a stride of terrifying power, he tore around the final turn, leaving top-tier contenders gasping in his dust to win by 2.5 commanding lengths. When he crossed the wire, the teletimer froze at a blistering 1:47 flat, equaling the all-time stakes record and stamping him as an elite, weaponized force of nature. Out west, there was no debate, no doubt, and no fear. Pancho Martin publicly flexed his muscle, and the California turf consensus hardened into an unshakable belief. Secretariat might have the glowing headlines and the commercial glamour, but Sham possessed the raw, savage violence required to bring the golden boy to his knees. The shadow had officially taken form, and it was marching straight for the Triple Crown. If the Santa Anita Derby announced Sham to the world as a terrifying force of nature, April 21st, 1973, was the day the untouchable armour of Secretariat shattered, and the entire racing landscape split right down the middle. Stepping onto the dirt at Aqueduct for the Wood Memorial, Secretariat wasn't expected to just win. He was expected to process a routine coronation. But horse racing is a savage, unpredictable sport where hubris gets buried in the dirt. In a performance that sent seismic shockwaves through the global racing empire, Secretariat struggled, burned through his energy, and collapsed to a shocking third-place finish behind his own stablemate, Angle Light. The myth of invincibility was blown wide open in a single, breathless 2-minute stretch drive. The untouchable god was human, vulnerable, and suddenly bleeding blood in the water. 2,000 miles away, Pancho Martin and the Sham camp didn't just smell blood. They saw a historic opening to seize the throne. Sham had travelled east, watched the Eastern icon falter, and stepped into Louisville, Kentucky, carrying the absolute momentum of a conqueror. The media circus leading into the 99th Kentucky Derby turned into a psychological battlefield. Martin, never one to hold his tongue, openly stoked the flames of doubt, weaponizing Secretariat's loss and declaring that the West Coast monster was coming to finish what the Wood Memorial started. The nation's sports writers, once unified in their worship of Big Red, suddenly fractured into 2 fiercely warring camps. Fans were locked in heated grandstand debates over a single haunting question. Was Secretariat a fading media illusion? Or was Sham the true, unstoppable monster built to rule the 1973 Triple Crown? The stage was set not just for a race, but for a high-stakes, violent collision of dynasties. May 5th, 1973. Over 134,000 screaming fans packed into Churchill Downs, their collective energy vibrating through the twin spires as the gate doors slam shut on the 99th Kentucky Derby. But before the official starter could even press the button to release the field, catastrophe struck inside the steel stalls. Sham, coiled like a loaded spring and explosive with nervous fury, reared violently inside his narrow gate, smashing his head full force against the heavy iron doors. The brutal impact instantly knocked out 2 of his front teeth and sliced open his gums, filling the horse's mouth with his own hot blood. In an arena where winning requires pure, pristine perfection, Sham was forced to leap into the defining battle of his life severely wounded, swallowing his own blood before he had even taken a single stride on the track. What happened over the next 2 minutes remains one of the most heroic, yet tragically overlooked displays of raw courage in equine history. Refusing to yield to the agonizing pain in his mouth, Sham dug his hooves deep into the Louisville dirt and surged forward, settling into a vicious, relentless rhythm under Laffit Pincay Jr. He stalked the blazing early pace with icy precision, turning into the stretch with the fury of a champion ready to claim his crown. Down the stretch, he drove past the field, stopping the clock in an astonishing 1:59.80, a staggering, record-shattering performance that broke Northern Dancer's legendary track mark. In almost any other edition of the Derby across a century and a half of racing history, Sham's time would have won him the Rose Garland by daylight. But on this divine afternoon, as Sham ran the second fastest Kentucky Derby in human history, Secretariat was busy pulling off an impossible, immortal miracle, accelerating through every single quarter mile to win by 2.5 lengths. Sham had run like an absolute god, only to prove that he was fighting something that wasn't human. 2 weeks after the blood and heartbreak of Louisville, the rivalry moved to the tight, sharp turns of Pimlico Racecourse for the 1973 Preakness Stakes. Pancho Martin and Laffit Pincay Jr. knew they were no longer just running against another thoroughbred. They were hunting a legend. But rather than backing down, the Sham camp doubled down on aggression. They adapted their tactics, transforming Sham from a mere challenger into a suffocating, inescapable phantom. From the moment the gates crashed open in Baltimore, Sham established his position with surgical precision, locking onto Secretariat's right flank like a heat-seeking missile. He didn't just track the leader, he shadowed Big Red's every breath, applying a relentless, crushing pressure designed to break the red horse's spirit before they ever hit the home stretch. As they thundered down the backstretch, the tension in the grandstands was near strangulation level. Every time Secretariat tried to settle into a rhythm, Sham was right there, glued to his hip, forcing an exhausting, suicidal pace. Then came the moment that etched itself into racing lore. Ron Turcotte launched Secretariat into his iconic, sweeping, last-to-first move around the clubhouse turn, a move so explosive it defied traditional pacing strategy. Yet, as Secretariat surged to the front, Sham didn't fold. He answered the bell with terrifying grit, digging in and matching strides with the leader, refusing to let the gap widen into a blowout. When they crossed the finish line, Secretariat set a blistering, controversially fast Preakness record of 1 minute, 53 seconds flat. And right behind him, running the second fastest Preakness in history at 1 minute, 53 3/5 seconds, was Sham. A dark, majestic shadow that ran fast enough to obliterate standard racing history, only to finish 2 lengths short of a miracle once again. Heading into the early June heat of New York, the 1973 Triple Crown had evolved from a mere athletic competition into a ruthless game of psychological chess. Secretariat's trainer, Lucien Lauren, and jockey, Ron Turcotte, realized they were caught in a brutal, double-edged trap engineered entirely by the existence of Sham. Sham was not a typical challenger who could be ignored or outweighted in the early fractions. He possessed elite, tactical speed and an unyielding competitive heart. His presence created a terrifying dilemma for Secretariat's team, a tactical vice with only 2 outcomes, both of which carried catastrophic risk. The first jaw of the trap was the steal. If Turcotte decided to play it safe, hold Secretariat back, and conserve energy for the agonizing 1.5-mile marathon at Belmont, Sham was more than fast enough to seize an early lead, dictate a crawling pace, and simply steal the race wire to wire. But the second jaw of the trap was even more deadly. The bleed. If Secretariat engaged Sham early to prevent him from stealing the lead, Sham would gladly lock eyes, match, stride for stride, and force a suicidal, scorching pace. Doing so meant both horses risked burning through their oxygen reserves, exhausting their muscles, and bleeding the clock until their bodies physically collapsed in the homestretch. Sham was the ultimate strategic paradox, a horse so dangerously gifted that he forced the greatest athlete in racing history into a high-stakes, zero-margin gamble where a single tactical error meant absolute disaster. June 9th, 1973. Over 69,000 frantic spectators crammed into Belmont Park, held in a state of suspended breath as the final chapter of the Triple Crown arrived. Pancho and Laffit Pincay Jr. sat in the quiet of the jockey room before the race, facing an ultimate, uncompromising decision. They knew that running a conservative, cautious race meant accepting a slow, inevitable death behind an elite champion, so they chose the alternative, pure, unadulterated warfare. The strategy for Sham was laid bare, an all-out, zero-compromise suicide pact. They would launch Sham out of the gate with aggressive violence, force Secretariat into an immediate, soul-crushing duel, and burn the race down from the very first furlong to see whose heart would burst first under the strain. When the gates crashed open, the pack was executed with terrifying precision. Sham leaped into the turn like a bullet, and Ron Turcotte on Secretariat took the bait without hesitation. What followed was a spectacle that stunned seasoned racing veterans into total, disbelieving silence. Instead of conserving stamina for the brutal 12-furlong test, two legendary thoroughbreds surged down the backstretch head-to-head, eye-to-eye, and stride for stride, at a pace meant for a 6-furlong sprint. They threw down unbelievable, blazing fractional splits of 46 1/5 seconds for the half-mile and 1 minute, 9 4/5 seconds for the 6 furlongs. Unheard-of fractions for a grueling marathon. It was not a horse race. It was a high-stakes duel between two physical titans, each refusing to give an inch, running at a speed that violated every law of equine endurance. For a mile of agonizing, breathless speed, Sham held the line. Side by side with Secretariat, he refused to yield a single inch, his hooves pounding the dirt in a violent, synchronized rhythm that pushed both horses deep into uncharted physical territory. But human and animal biology have absolute hard limits. And as they rounded the far turn at Belmont Park, Sham's body hit a wall of catastrophic physical reality. The frantic, suicidal pace had drained his lungs of oxygen and flooded his magnificent muscles with suffocating lactic acid. Under normal circumstances, any opponent would have slowed down alongside him. Instead, Sham looked over and witnessed something truly terrifying. Secretariat wasn't slowing down. In fact, the big red horse was accelerating, moving like a mythical runaway engine that defied the fundamental laws of nature. It was the tragic, heartbreaking turning point where a biological monster collided with an impossible miracle. As Secretariat unleashed his legendary turn of foot and began to pull away, Sham's heroic engine finally gave out. He did not quit out of a lack of heart or courage. He faded because his body simply ran out of fuel, trying to keep pace with a machine. As the canyon between them widened from 5 lengths to 10, then 20, and ultimately to an astounding 31 lengths, Sham slowed to a gentle trot, exhausted and completely broken by the sheer, supernatural brilliance of the winner. Secretariat thundered across the finish line to complete the greatest Triple Crown victory in human history, while Sham, spent and utterly drained, crossed the wire in 5th place. He had dared to challenge a god, and in doing so, had sacrificed his own body to prove just how truly untouchable Secretariat really was. Decades after the dirt settled at Belmont Park, science finally revealed the terrifying truth behind why Sham was capable of pushing Secretariat into the realm of pure immortality. When Sham passed away in 1993 at the age of 23, veterinarians performed a routine necropsy, and what they discovered inside his chest cavity left the equine medical world in absolute shock. A standard elite racehorse possesses a heart that weighs roughly 8 to 8.5 pounds. Sham's heart, however, was a colossal biological anomaly, weighing an astonishing estimated 18 pounds. He was literally born with a heart more than twice the size of a normal thoroughbred, giving him a biological supercharger capable of pumping staggering amounts of oxygenated blood through his massive frame. He was not a normal horse. He was an equine freak of nature, engineered by genetic fate to dominate his species. Yet, this astonishing discovery only deepened the tragic poetry of his existence. The only horse in recorded modern history known to possess a heart larger than Sham's was Secretariat himself, whose legendary heart was estimated at a mind-boggling 22 pounds. Science had finally validated what race fans felt in their bones during the summer of 1973. Sham was an absolute giant who possessed the engine of an all-time champion, but he was doomed by the ultimate cruelty of cosmic timing. He was a creature of legendary proportions who had the extraordinary misfortune of running alongside an impossible biological miracle. His giant heart carried him through broken teeth, intense physical pain, and suicidal racing tactics, proving that while history quickly forgets second place, his spirit belonged strictly to the elite royalty of racing legends. When the sun set on the 1973 Triple Crown, history etched Secretariat's name in golden, unshakable letters. Yet, embedded forever within that brilliant light is the dark, majestic silhouette of the rival who made it all possible. Without a villain of terrifying proportions, a hero's journey is reduced to a meaningless, hollow exhibition. Sham was never just an obstacle on a track. He was the ultimate catalyst, the ruthless, relentless force that refused to let Secretariat coast into legend. By driving the pace to unprecedented, breakneck limits, Sham forced Secretariat to unleash every ounce of his supernatural potential, transforming standard victories into immortal, timeless masterpieces. The enduring tragedy of Sham lies in a single, haunting question. What would have happened if he had been born in 1972 or 1968 or almost any other year in racing history? The answer is undeniably clear. He would have swept the Triple Crown with commanding, historic dominance, claiming his rightful throne as one of the greatest athletes to ever grace the American turf. Instead, he lives on as racing's greatest shadow, a tragic king who ran the races of a lifetime, only to collide with a miracle. History may remember Secretariat as the ultimate champion, but true racing fans know the raw, undeniable truth. The light of Big Red's legacy shines as brightly as it does only because of the giant, unyielding shadow glued to his flank. History belongs to the victors, but immortality belongs to the warriors who dared to challenge the impossible. Sham was not a victim of failure. He was a monument to absolute courage. He ran with a giant, broken heart, swallowed his own blood, and pushed the boundaries of equine biology to force a legend into godhood. When you look back at 1973, do not just applaud the icon in the spotlight. Remember the dark, majestic phantom who ran beside him, the tragic titan who proved that true greatness isn't measured by the crown you wear, but by how fiercely you fight before you fall.